Last week we spoke about listening. The whole topic of the Dvar Torah last week was about how listening is something that is not selective. Even though our AirPods enable us to cancel the noise and to be aware of some conversation but not of others, usually when it comes to listening, there's no choosing. There's no closing our ears. This week's parashah is going to talk about a different kind of perceiving, which is seeing. The parashah of this week is called Re'eh. When it comes to seeing, there's most selection. Re'eh means to see, to watch. There's most selection. You can choose to close your eyes to some things. And of course, some people will try to encourage you to open your eyes. When it comes to seeing, there's also a reaction usually associated in the Jewish tradition. There's a whole chapter of the Talmud that is called Perek HaRo'eh, the one who sees. And there's a whole set of blessings in the Jewish tradition that are based on us seeing something. So for example, if you see an important person, like you see a king, there's a blessing. If you see an important rabbi, there's a blessing. If you see the rainbow, there's a blessing. If you see ruins of a Jewish holy city, there is a blessing. There's almost a blessing for everything that you see that is not your normal seeing. It's not your normal sight. And in that sense, there is a blessing that I always found very powerful because there are not many opportunities to offer that blessing. I have to confess, I have never recited that blessing, which is the blessing for someone who sees Jewish multitudes. When you see hundreds of thousands of Jews together, there's a blessing. The rabbis discuss what's the number, and they eventually arrive at the number 600,000. Have you ever seen 600,000 Jews all together in the same place? Yes? Mount Sinai. Okay, you remember that. Good. I forgot. Your face looked familiar to me. Now I know from where. So yes, when we were at Sinai, there were 600 souls when we crossed the sea. But, I was too young. I don't remember those moments. There are not many opportunities to see more than 500,000 Jews together in one place. That's, if you do the math, that's a large percentage of the world Jewish population. And yet there are moments in which Jews gather together for something. And this week's parsha contains one of those moments, because by the end of Parashat Re'eh, we talk about the pilgrimage holidays. Those of you who learned with me the book of Devarim, we know that one of the revolutionary ideas of the book of Deuteronomy is to encourage Jews to celebrate all together the holidays in Jerusalem. Instead of having local sanctuaries in different cities across the land, the book of Deuteronomy decides that when it comes to celebrating, we're all going to gather in Jerusalem. And I want you to imagine for a second what that feeling was. Imagine we lived in the Israel of 2,000 years ago, or a little bit more than that, when the temple was still standing, and 3 times a year, but mainly for the Holy of Sukkot, that was the big one. But 3 times a year, we would all leave our homes for a week and meet in Jerusalem. I don't know if you have ever seen a big event taking place in one city, like, the final of a World Cup or something really, really big. Like the city gets completely transformed. And once a year, all the Jews in the land of Israel, who were basically all of the Jews, would walk to Jerusalem and meet there. Now, I don't know how it feels, but I do know how it feels that once a year, this sanctuary gets filled with people. And it's pretty powerful. And we prepare for weeks for that moment. I know how it feels after a whole summer of recess to open a school, to open the doors of the school again and to see the school filled with children. Now imagine that feeling multiplied by thousands. 500,000 Jews all together, crowding the city of Jerusalem and its streets with songs of joy and celebration. And there's a blessing for that. So when people gather there, they would say this blessing called Chacham Harazim. But the thing is, all of these massive gatherings of Jews that took place in ancient days in the Holy Land were gatherings of rejoicing. They were not gatherings of grieving, of crying. There were not massive demonstrations. There were not gatherings of complaining or demanding. I don't know how many of you follow the news in Israel. Sadly, there are some things that you only see if you follow the news in Israel. But I think last week we were close to saying that blessings in the street of Tel Aviv. Last week, hundreds of thousands of Israelis gathered together under one claim, one cry, one demand. Bring them back home now. It was in the streets of Jerusalem with the songs of joy and celebration in the holiday of Sukkot. It wasn't like we read in the books of the prophets, the sound of the bride and the sound of the groom, the sound of joy and the sound of simcha, of celebration. It was the sound of mourning. It was this wailing sound of mothers crying for their children. It was Rachel Goldberg commemorating the Yortzeit for her son Hirsch. It was Yair Horn and his father Itzik speaking to hundreds of thousands of Israelis about their brother and son Eitan, who is still being held hostage at the hands of the evil terrorists of Hamas. And I was telling you that when it comes to seeing, there's a choice as opposed to listening. And some people have opened their eyes and some people have not opened their eyes yet. And if all we follow and if all we read and if all we see and we listen to when it comes to what's going on in Israel, it's going to come from American influencers, we are going to continue arguing with most of the lies of our enemies and even with some of their truth. But if we listen to the plea of our Israeli brothers and sisters, there's no one there arguing with fake news. They're just saying, bring our children back. There's a unified voice in the Israeli society. Leave aside some radical elements and some fanatics that are there. But most of the people like you and like me are demanding that Israel does whatever it has to do, to bring the very few hostages that are still alive to the embrace of their families that are waiting for them. And I don't know how many of you remember the impact that we diaspora Jews had with some realities in Israel 2.5 years ago, before October 7th, when everything was about the judicial reform and the change in some of the rules when it comes to the Supreme Court. And we American Jews made a difference. We American Jews opened our eyes and made our voice heard and had an impact in the reality and in the present of the state of Israel. Maybe it is about time. Maybe it's about time that we amplify the voice of those who are demonstrating in the streets of Tel Aviv while their children are serving in the reserves for a war that they are struggling to make sense of it. I believe that the land of Israel is a beautiful and holy land that must be filled with crowds when it comes to celebration and rejoicing. The land of Israel was not built, was not conceived, was not envisioned to be a land where bereaved mothers cry over the death of their children or demand the return of the ones who are still alive in front of hundreds of thousands of fellow Israelis. I hope and pray that with our help, with our activism, with our effort, one day there will be 500 or 600,000 Israelis welcoming the hostages back to their homes. That's the gathering that we need. That's the gathering that we want. I want to be there to recite the blessing of witnessing a gathering of 600,000 Jews when the hostages return all home.